going to be checking those bees every day to see about larva count. And those are really advanced beekeeping to be sustainable. Most beekeepers are not sustainable, and 90% of all your commercial beekeepers are not sustainable. They're already accepting the loss and they're buying bees to repopulate, or they're splitting their hives constantly to propagate their loss because it's not sustainable for them. They stress their bees for travel, they feed them corn sugar and almonds, and when they come back they're sick and they have trouble propagating and they have loss. As a commercial beekeeper, you're going to have to accept the loss. And as time goes on, the loss is going to get bigger because of how we keep things. We have learned over the last 100 years that if you make the bees bigger, they hold more honey and they can carry more pollen. When you made the bees bigger, the cell size got bigger, and it made the mites be able to get in the cells, and it made the hive beetles be able to crawl across there, and it made it so harder for the bees to control the natural stuff that happened to them all the time. Mites have always been with bees. There's always been hive beetles, but you got to remember, we put them in a box now, and originally the bees would make comb in a tree and hang there because they're Mediterranean. So they weren't in a box, and the comb hanged in the tree. Now that we've moved them everywhere, bees have to go into places, and that's why people say, well, you see the hole in the log, that's where the bees are going. Naturally, the bees would never do that, but they got to get out of the wind and the elements because they're not in the Mediterranean. So in that type of...
Hold on, real quick. You're saying the native bees in the Mediterranean build their comb outside?
Yes.
Just hanging from a tree branch?
They hang them from tree branches. You can walk in a cave, and then places like Kenya where they do...
Like our wasps do here.
Well, kind of. You'll see stuff like...
Similar.
Yeah. Wow.
You'll see a tree limb like this, and then you'll have a comb, and 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 a comb hanging from a tree. And what happens, back then, the mites and the hive beetles fell to the ground and didn't jump back into all this stuff because bees' natural habitat is 10 to 30 feet in the air. Down here is completely unnatural for them, and when you put them in a box, it's even more unnatural for them. That's why I tell you, please inspect your beehives and feed them and watch them, because now you've taken something that is naturally hanging in the air and open, and you put it in a box, and it's going to get hot or it's going to get too cold, and you're going to have to manage them. So if you're going to keep bees, and you buy a beehive or a package, make sure you really know what you want to do it. Because nowadays, such as myself, if you're going to buy stuff for me, and you say, man, I just can't, it's just too much of a hassle, I'll say, no problem, I'll come get them, but I want $150 from you. It's not to teach you a lesson, but now I've got to propagate, and I'm going to have to work these bees, right? Or I'm going to have to split them and make them myself. Also, when you asked about stuff, when you're in Kenya, they have caves, and sometimes the bees will block the wind on the inside. They'll have those combs going, but they'll make one big comb like this in the front. It's usually about maybe 8 foot long and maybe about 4 foot deep.
Wow.
Of honey in the front. And those guys take these big rods and they cut like this, and they fall to the ground, and the kids pick them up and put them on mules and haul them off. So sometimes they get really, really big. They do. All the time. And they rebuild them. The two types of beekeeping that most people like to do is Langstroth beekeeping and top bar beekeeping. Langstroth is a honey producer. Top bar is a wax producer. Remember, if you're going to produce a product, you have to feed. It's like cattle. You're not going to get milk unless you feed them. The more you feed them, the more milk you get. The more you feed the bees, the more honey you get. If you're doing top bar beekeeping, please feed your bees a lot, because they have a gland that needs the food to produce wax. And every time you cut the wax off to promote them to do it, they need the feed to make the wax. If you're going for honey production, you're going to have to feed the bees to get your honey production that you need. And when I say feed your bees, when you get your bees for the first 6 weeks, you're going to have to feed them. You're gonna have to feed them a liquid sugar water solution, either a honey solution or a juice solution that has a high sugar content in them for the first six weeks. You're gonna have to promote them to build the wax to get that queen to lay hard in that hive. After that, you're gonna have to feed them either by, like I said, my little food forest that I do, 5 foot by 10 foot long, and I propagate sunflowers, morning glories, and Russian sage. Russian sage is a beautiful purple plant that blooms all summer long, really good for your bees. The marigolds or morning glories will go across and make a wall with the sunflowers breaking the wind, and at the end of the year you have a sunflower about this big. A flower that big is hit by 1 bee, a flower that big is hit by 15. So that's a mass feeder at the end of the year for your bees. So you're going to have to feed them, because every time you cut that comb on a top bar hive, they have to make wax production, which means they need food to do it. On a top bar hive, if you're going to do honey and you're going to get more flow, they're going to need some sugar source to make that honey flow. So I just don't want you to think I'm going to put these bees in the box and they're just going to do stuff. You can, but don't expect to have a lot of honey and don't expect to have a lot of wax. If you're just having bees for pollination and they're doing just fine for you, don't mess with them. If a guy says, look man, those bees are in that tree, I'd sure like to have them, ask him why. And if he says, well, the pollinating stuff, and you go, don't mess with them, they're doing it right now. There's no sense of moving them.
What's the difference in a Warre hive?
With the top bar and a Warre, they're both top bar hives. A Warre hive is a Langstroth model that's stackable. So you're going to have top bars, instead of having them in a long run, you're going to have them in a short box and you're going to stack those top bars. A first generation Warre, you had to remove the box to get to the next frames. The second generation, they have a door on the side that you can flip down and you can slide the frames in and out and look at them. Bees make propolis. You better get to scrape this stuff off, because remember that comb? There's no support on a top bar, so if it wiggles, it falls and it kills stuff. So those are things that, you know, if you're going to choose some of these things, you need to find a beekeeping club, course, or a mentor. You need to do something to see it hands-on. You can read a lot of books and you can do a lot of videos. And I'm going to tell you right now, in 2 years you'll probably lose your bees, because you're going to get in that system. Especially if you're going to be managing them thinking you're going to use that system. If you put bees in the box and you put them out there and you fed them for a little bit and you got them going and you say, I'm just going to leave them go, man. They're doing just great. They're doing just fine. I got them rolling. They're doing awesome. You're doing great then. Because you're not asking them to produce honey. You're not asking them to produce wax. You just gave them a home and you made sure with enough sugar water I got them promoted to work. And they're going to work and they'll work just fine. Right? I know people that don't flop boxes, add honey supers or nothing, and they have, I know a guy that's had them for 15 years. He just leaves it out there. He leaves all 9 of them out there. But he doesn't expect anything from them. But he also knows that if he doesn't check them, if he loses one, that's probably what's going to happen too. So I want you to think about that. If you're going to get your bees, think about what kind of beekeeping you want to do. Really do some research. Think about what kind of bees do you want. Do I need a Minnesota hygienic bee because of what I'm going to do with them? Or am I okay with just the Carolians just being cool that are really not aggressive and, you know? Look at your area and look what's available. The one thing I'm going to tell you about the free bee, if you look on Craigslist, you'll see people, we do swarm removal. Ask the guy if he's a contractor or not. Because most of your swarms aren't hanging off the porch, and they're not hanging off a tree
In the wall
of somebody's house. And you think you're going to go get those free bees? I took a chimney apart down in downtown Cheyenne. Governor said, Bee Whisperer, come take this. This is a historical area of Wyoming. Bee Whisperer, come. The governor said. Little did I know that brick on that chimney was $3,000 a brick for historical sand brick that they don't make anymore, and the guy has to make them at 45 bricks at a lot, or it's not worth his time. So if you don't know what you're doing as a contractor, you just went bankrupt, lost your house and everything because you thought you were going to get free bees. I don't ever recommend you removing free bees from anybody's house unless you can tell that guy, I'm going to rip the side of the house off, I'm going to get those bees out, I'm going to scrub it so you don't get mice, ants, or anything back. So you got to have a contractor come back and fix this. One thing I want you to remember, those are not free bees. The free bee is the one when the guy calls and says, hey man, I got this cluster hanging in my tree, and you go, not a problem, I'll be there at $60.
Yep.
Charge him.
Yep.
If you're going to go get them, charge them. You got to get gas over there. You're going to have to start feeding those bees and all kinds of stuff, because if he doesn't want to pay you, he's going to spray them anyway. Either he called you to save them, and if it's worth your time, remember, you're going to have to propagate and work these bees. Right? If you really want them, say, if I'll come over and get them for $50, and you'll have people that'll say, I'll just come and get them. The third thing about those free bees that you're going to go get, remember I told you the reason they swarm this stuff is because either the queen is sick or she's done laying. So if you get that swarm of bees, you might already have to call a package bee company to get a new queen, because that one's either sick or she's done laying. And you got to remember, those bees that just left that hive are only going to live for 15 to 20 days anyway. Something to think about. And I know a lot of guys. The guy that's coming tomorrow, he propagates almost 50% of his hives from feral bees and swarm removal. So he's good at it. He's looking for the queens and everything when he's going to pick up swarms. So if you guys get a swarm of bees, get them into a box right away and see if they're going to start. Try to get something with a foundation already built in them. Swarm bees and top bar hives are really hard to start to propagate if you don't feed them a lot, because they got to build all that stuff. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go outside, and I'm going to show you how we set up the location here, what all the equipment is for, and why. And then I'm going to briefly just take a hive apart, show you the parts. I'm going to show you how I work a hive and why. And this is just going to be basic. If you really want to know, and you want to know, I have a book that I've made. It's like, so it's, this is what it looks like. I'm not professional. I would love to have someone turn it into a book, but I'm not professional. But we can send it to you, and I'm hoping to work with Josiah and make a DVD series on the different types of beekeeping that you'll be able to buy to show this. When you order a book from me, you'll get a Wyoming bee law. Wyoming is the second largest state when it comes to the laws for apiary and bee propagation. I want you to look at these laws if you order a book from us and investigate them and see why you don't have them in your area, why you might need some in your area, or why some people in Wyoming are fools. Because they make you register your beehives in Wyoming GPS location. And you can't have a beehive next to mine within 2 miles, because mine's registered for that 2-mile radius. That's my honey flow area in my area, and that's where my bees propagate, and I don't want your bees stealing from my honey flow area. I don't know how that works, but I guess it's in the law book.
How do you get the bees to read it?
Well, I figured that one out. I threw a cell phone in them, and they didn't reach out and touch me.
If you make a law that says bees won't come, they won't come.
The guy told me, he says, how do you control your bees? And I said, they're free range. If they've got my bee brand on them, those are my bees. So I always send a book out. And since I do things with kids, you also get a copy of like crossword puzzles. Has some anatomy and stuff of the bee for people to kind of look at, for you to start doing some reference on. Because what I want you to do is I want you to look at this. This is a really good book that I put together. That's why it's really good. But it talks about the different types of bees, how to set up. So you're going to kind of see this setup even in this book, and why you're going to work them. When we come out here, you're going to see why we set it up the way we work it. You're going to see, when you read books, you see these guys put hives all in a row, all the way down. And I'm going to show you why you shouldn't do that. You should put them like this. And you should work this one, skip this one because it's behind you, and do this one. That way you got some space from those guys that you just pissed off. Right, but you see people stack them right beside each other, and they work them right through, and they do just fine. But for a guy that has them at home, man, I don't like getting stung any more than anybody else, man. As the beekeeper, you're going to get stung. I don't know anybody that's been a beekeeper that has not got stung. And I don't know a beekeeper that's not allergic to the bee sting. Everybody says, oh, I get stung by a bee and I just get a little bump and it's cool. Awesome, you're just not as allergic to the venom as what's going in there, because it's the same venom that's in a rattlesnake. And I don't know anybody that's been bitten by a rattlesnake that's not allergic to it. Just the effect of how much toxin you get and how much you receive at one time and how allergic you are to it, because some people get the toxin in their body and it never leaves and it builds up, and every time you get a sting, that toxin stays there and it just doesn't get out of your body. It just gets worse every time. And then there's that luck of the draw that I got stung and it cured cancer. And people think that's funny, but one of the people that, his name's Corwin out of Colorado, and he owns the Bee Guardianship, and he has over 23,000 members for the Bee Guardians worldwide. And he had spone burrs and sturs in his shoulder and bursitis, and he was out working and he got stung 7 times in the same spot. The bees knew exactly where to sting him for some reason, and he doesn't have bone spurs anymore, and he doesn't have bursitis in his shoulder anymore, and he can actually reach up over his head now. So after that, he changed his whole thing and became a beekeeper. He couldn't understand why he got stung in the same spot 7 times over the last week. Evidently the bees knew something about him and they wanted to help him, and now he's the bee guardian with all these people, so evidently they picked him. So that's one of the reasons I want you to remember. Sometimes the bees pick the beekeeper for certain reasons. So I want to walk outside, and I want to walk through Jack's setup. Let's go out. I got benches set up. Let's go ahead.